If you can have that, if you can outline, okay, what's my strategy to reach my community? What is the mission that we have? What's the mandate the Lord has given us specifically for our cultural context? And then what's the message that we want to get out to our community? Then it makes adapting to technology so much easier.
This is Equip and Engage, a podcast by Subsplash, exploring how ministry, technology, and innovation come together to equip churches around the world to engage their communities.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us on Equip and Engage, the podcast here for Subsplash. We're so grateful that you are here. My name is Justin. I'll be your host today, and my role here at Subsplash as a part of the team is to work with strategic partnerships and denominations to help equip churches globally with digital technology to help them reach their context. And I'm joined today by Kristin, our Director of Marketing.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm glad that you're here.
Oh, wouldn't have missed it.
That's awesome. Today we'll be talking a little bit more about connecting with your context. In an earlier episode, we talked really what that means to lean in and listen to your neighborhood and listen to the city that God's called you to. How do you actually effectively reach the people that God has brought you into reach? And so today we're going to take a deeper look at what that actually looks like from a practical sense when it comes to communicating, when it comes to actually reaching those who God has already connected you with. That'd be those who are connected to the vision, maybe if you're a church planter or church pastor, people who attend your church, and also what does it look like to reach the people who are not yet connected to you. And so we're really glad to hear your perspective today. And so as the Director of Marketing here at Subsplash, what does that job entail?
Yeah, oh man, I really think I have the best job in the world. But as the Director of Marketing, I get to lead a team of awesome storytellers, and our job and our mission is to tell the story of Subsplash with the hopes that churches will hear about it and be able to be better equipped to use the technology and the platform that we've developed to engage their audiences more effectively. So it's really an honor.
Yeah, that's great. And we're glad you're here.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah. Not just for this podcast, but here at the company as well.
Me too.
But what drives that passion? You also are pretty heavily involved in your local church here in the Seattle area.
Yeah, man. Oh, gosh. My husband and I recently, about 2 years ago, moved up more north. We're originally down South Tacoma, Puyallup area, if anyone knows where that's from. And we moved up to follow the call that God had for us, which was to be youth pastors. And so my husband and I get to be youth pastors to junior high and high schoolers. And we also get the privilege of leading a college internship where we get to take college-age students and integrate them into the life of the local church. And they get to be discipled. They get to learn the inner workings of how a church organization operates while also getting their 4-year fully accredited degree. And so it's a really great opportunity. It's a really sweet season for us.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you for doing that. I also was a youth pastor for a number of years.
Man, bless you.
And it is a beautiful calling. It was one of my favorite seasons of ministry, honestly. So let's go ahead and dive in then to talking about reaching your context and how we do that through communication. What are some of the first things that we need to know when it comes to communicating with the people that God has sent you to?
Yeah, I mean, if you know, I mean, we know we work closely with technology, and it is changing and developing at a really rapid rate, which can be where some of the intimidation comes from, right? It can be really intimidating to feel like you know where to begin. And so I would say don't even worry about that yet. The first thing that you want to do when really having the desire to effectively engage and communicate to your cultural context is to start with your strategy and mission and message. If you can have that, if you can outline, okay, what's my strategy to reach my community? What is the mission that we have? What's the mandate the Lord has given us specifically for our cultural context? And then what's the message that we want to get out to our community? Then it makes adapting to technology so much easier. It can feel really overwhelming not knowing what to choose or what piece of technology to grab and pull from if you first don't know what your strategy, your mission, and your message are. And so I would say before that, if you're stopping here and you heard that and you're like, oh no, I don't know what my strategy is, I would say start dreaming, start planning, talk with your team, talk with your communities, those that you would say are in your close circle, and really map out what you feel like the Lord is calling you to do for your specific cultural context, not just the good news, not just the gospel message, but what He's called you to do in your community. And then it can make applying those kind of templates and frameworks to the tools that are existed and kind of are out there right now so much easier.
I think that's great. I think sometimes it's really easy to get worked up on trying to find ways to amplify your voice. But if you don't know what you are going to say or know what God has called you to say in that specific time, season, or context, let's worry about finding your voice first before trying to find a way to amplify it.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. So let's say that somebody has found their mission. They found the message. They know that deep conviction of who they're supposed to be reaching and how to get that done. Well, what are some ways that we can amplify that voice, though? What's available to us today?
Oh man, the opportunities are endless. This probably doesn't sound new. It can be really overwhelming, like what I talked about. And in a little bit, we'll dive into kind of specific social media channels and some behavioral statistics around those, and how churches can leverage those methods more effectively to get their message out there.
Right.
But I think, even talking about that, it can be really overwhelming at the same time to not only know the tools are out there, but then see how other ministries are using those tools. And that can feel really overwhelming and even insecure at moments. Being in ministry, being a pastor, there are moments where I'm like, man, that youth ministry looks so cool.
Sure.
And I'm like, oh, but man, our context and the message that we're delivering is so us. It's so authentic to who God's called us to be. And because we know our message and our mission and our strategy, when I see certain things, I can then say, does how they're using Instagram apply to my community and my context? One example of this that I've seen churches do really well, I've seen some churches where you can tell instantly that the heartbeat of their church's community, that is the heartbeat, living in life outside of the four walls. And so that's the message that they put out there. That's the story they're telling on these platforms. They're not necessarily telling the story of their weekend services or all these photos of worship sets. They're actually showing photos and posting and testimonials and quotes from people that are living life in community together. And so I think it can be kind of easy for us to fall into the trap of, that looks really cool, that seems to be working really effectively for them. Well, I would argue the reason it is really probably effective, if you're seeing it be effective, is because they're doing something that's very authentic to their community and their cultural context. So take the method that you see, apply it to your mission and your strategy. If it fits, give it a try, innovate. If it doesn't fit and it makes you go, man, I don't really know if that's us, then I would challenge you to step back and really start examining what the mission and the strategy that the Lord's given you, and see what methods can kind of fall into that.
I think that's great. We had talked about in an earlier podcast of this idea of the difference between cloning churches and birthing churches. What has God called you to create in the neighborhood He's called you to, or the city, and not just borrow from somebody else? And so your point is, find something that works, but if it doesn't look like what somebody else is doing, that's okay, but still give it a go. Is that kind of what you're encouraging people to do?
And that's the paradox of social media, right? Or technology like that. Those channels and these platforms is, we can have access to learn so much, but at the same time, we're exposed to so much. And it can be a challenge to kind of remember where our footing is and what framework that the Lord's called us to.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, let's talk then a few about some of those platforms then. So some of the big names that come to mind: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even email, if we want to go there. Maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the way that people are interacting with these things. What are some statistics that you've heard about the actual true engagement that comes from these platforms, and how do we use them effectively?
Yeah, and I think before we even go into that, I want to debunk the fact that these tools are powerful, and these tools are, impactful to how we do ministry and get the message out. My husband and I, even years ago, right? Like, printed material was how you got the message out everywhere.
Right.
That was how, mailers, and they're still really effective in certain contexts. That's why knowing your cultural context is so important, because it's not that mailers necessarily are obsolete, but the way that the world is advancing and growing, there are becoming increasingly more effective ways to reach people because of where they're at. But my husband and I got home to our house one day, and there was a little yellow piece of paper sticking in our door. And I went out, and instantly I was like, someone's trying to sell me something. And I went out and I grabbed it, and I was like, oh, it's for a church. And it said on one side, it was this great yellow card, probably 5x7, really nice. Anyone that likes a good printed material, they really did a good job on this. Fun pattern, big white bold text that said, "You're invited to church this Sunday." And I'm like, great, I love this. Flip it over, and it says service times 9 and 11. That was it.
There was no church name?
No
logo? No website?
Nothing. No address, nothing. And instantly I felt sad.
Yeah.
Instantly I was like, oh man, this is the do what not to do example right here of how to leverage, of an example of ineffective communicating to reach someone in a form of engagement. And instantly I felt sad. Probably primarily because of what I specifically do for work, and then also just deeply being connected to the local church. And I wanted to find this person. I wanted to run outside my house, hope that they were maybe down the street, and I could go grab them and say, wait, your name's not on here. And so I think that's the power of digital. When we get into these platforms, as we're going to dive into these, that's the power of these digital platforms, is when someone hands you something physical, they're really banking on the idea, in this example particular, that you're going to remember or know or be able to take initiative and follow up on maybe if the Holy Spirit was really tugging on your heart in that moment. And I felt pulled and drawn to maybe attend this church, and then I set it down or I forget about it, or I don't know how to take another step.
Right.
In that moment, I was like, if I wanted to take another step, I cannot. Whereas that's not digital platforms, that's not a barrier. Digital platforms, I can continue to discover. I can visit websites. I can scroll through more photos. I can read comments and reviews from other people that have attended that church. The discoverability process through these digital channels is endless.
Yep.
And really, when we look at it, that's can be leveraged to help people along. How we talk about it here at Subsplash is their discipleship journey, getting them from seekers to believers into the disciples. And so that can be really powerful with these platforms.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note as well that these kind of platforms, and we're obviously a technology company, and we dabble in the digital space and quite effectively, and I think sometimes the fear can be, or the thought can be, this is somehow going to replace the transformative work of relationships.
Yeah.
And I would also just encourage all of us that are a part of this conversation today. These tools aren't meant to replace the transformative work of relationships. Yep. At the end of the day, the gospel is best served and is most effective when we are interacting with each other. And so, but these tools are a way to help people discover that family of faith that they may be looking for and not even know where to go.
Yeah.
And so that call to action piece that you talked about, even in the digital space, while there are lots of ways to, an endless trail of connecting into other ways, that call to action is still pretty important.
Yes, yeah. It's meant to enhance
the
relationships that we already have.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so let's talk a few about these specifics now.
Yes.
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. What are some statistics of the way people are actually organically engaging with this content?
Yeah, I mean, the first great question is, are people using social media?
Yeah.
The answer is, if you doubted it at all, a resounding yes, they are. Statistics actually show that the average adult has around 8.5. We're not totally sure where the half comes from, but 8.5 social media accounts. And Justin, how many do you think you have?
Probably half that amount. I would say maybe 4.25.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I was like, well, if I count my MySpace that I probably never deactivated.
Right. Which, by the way, that could be the half. If you're on MySpace and you're wondering why people aren't engaging with you, that could be the issue of the tool. Yeah.
If I count that, if I count my Facebook that I probably created in junior high and forgot the email password for, and forgot the email I actually used because it probably was like 20 characters, I don't know why we felt compelled to have really long emails in junior high and high school. I'm like, maybe I really had 8.5, maybe. But if I actually look at how many I actively engage on, for me personally, the number is probably closer to 4 to 5. So to think about that is compelling in itself. And they even say Gen Z and millennials have in the 9s. Wow. And so if we're even looking at this generation that's coming up in our local churches, they are on social media actively. So I think that's, 45% of people around the world use social media. 45%. If we're looking at half the demographic of the world, the population of the world, we have access to 45% just through these channels.
Wow.
To me, that's a huge impact.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just high level, some statistics around our people using social media. They actually also say that around 1 million people a day join social media. And although it may feel very overwhelming and daunting to think about, me, you, Justin, anyone, a senior pastor, anyone in leadership, anyone that actually has a message to put out there, thinking about being able to actively engage 1 million people every day maybe feels a little overwhelming, but that's the potential, right? Yep. And if we have the best message, can we leverage that potential?
I think that's great. And by the way, this is not just a young person's game, right? This is not just a Gen Z or millennial pursuit.
Nope.
We're seeing every year, both in app usage, in website usage, in social media usage, these demographics, 45 and over, Spike, I've got a 91-year-old grandfather who plays solitaire on a tablet every day.
Yeah.
And he's very proficient with his
Yes.
tablet. And so I think sometimes the misnomer can also be, well, this is just for the young.
Yeah.
Actually, this is for everybody, and we need to learn how to leverage these tools well.
Yeah.
So what is the purpose then of, and speaking of leveraging tools well, what would we use Instagram for instance?
That's a great question. So Instagram, I would say the most powerful way to use Instagram is for a holistic story, to holistically communicate the story that you're going to get across. And you can tell that happens pretty effectively, maybe not when you're scrolling through a general newsfeed, but as soon as someone goes to your page, they say that it takes about 7 seconds to make a first impression. And I guarantee that whether we've identified it or not, subconsciously, we are making assumptions or conclusions or deciding whether we like what we see or not within that 7 seconds of visiting even a Facebook page, not even person-to-person interactions. Yeah. And so back to your point, this enhances those person-to-person interactions, and it should complement what someone would see on a weekend. And so or even in community through the week. So what your Instagram should be used for is telling the story of that cultural context, the communication story that you're putting out to your cultural context in a really powerful and effective way. Some stats around this: Instagram has 1 billion monthly active users and 5 million use it daily. 5 million.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of people on a daily use.
Yeah, so you're saying don't just make your Instagram feed a bulletin board.
Right.
You can still make announcements about what you're doing, but maybe tell a story about how that program or how that class actually facilitated life change through somebody. And you're saying that's much more compelling than just giving information.
And that's why going back to the knowing your strategy, your mission, and your message is so crucial. Otherwise, you're going to feel like you're just throwing a hodgepodge of content out there just for the sake of putting content out there. Whereas if you know your strategy and your mission, it will be a very cohesive story. Is my mission community? Is my mission outreach? Is my mission missions? What is the mission and the mandate that God's giving me? And tell that story on your Instagram.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And you said 7 seconds is the amount of time. 7's the number of God, so social media must be divine. That's amazing. What about, we don't have to go into all the details, but like Twitter, for instance, Facebook, how should we leverage these tools differently?
Great question. Facebook, and we're seeing this more and more, Ryan Collins on that, our most recent one of our older episodes, he also talked about Facebook and how they're leveraging community and faith-based organizations. And so if you haven't listened to that episode, I really encourage you guys to go back and listen. It's really great. But that kind of adds value and illuminates that Facebook, one of the most powerful ways to use Facebook is for community. One of the most powerful ways to use Facebook is to leverage the day-to-day interactions of community. And so whether that's building pages for community groups, whether that's building pages for certain ministries or outreaches that your church does, leverage that, share the events, and invite people, and then actually have collaboration and communication happening on those pages too, to actually foster and enhance those connections in that community aspect.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think one of the fears that I've heard, I have the great opportunity of talking with a lot of different churches and a lot of different contexts in a lot of different countries. And one of the things that comes up, and we've talked about this sense of all the different options can be overwhelming, and a fear to what if I put all of my investment into this thing and it changes. What would be just a good next step? Because the reality is we have to change.
Yeah.
These modern tools that we've been given can be utilized by the Holy Spirit for the advancement of the gospel, for the reaching of our neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
And so to completely dismiss them or look away, I think is a disservice even to what God wants to do through the work that He's called us to do.
Yeah.
What would be some advice that you would give to anybody who feels nervous about adapting, nervous about changing? Where do I go next to make this happen?
Yeah, I'd say pick one.
Yeah, good.
Just pick one. Pick one of these social media tools. And, Twitter is kind of the best place for the most often unfiltered communication. So great place to share, scriptures, quotes from the message on the weekend, testimonials, things like that. Email is a great place to get information to people. And so I would say pick one. either pick one that you feel like you can tackle most effectively, or find someone on your team or in your community that feels confident. Even this is a great way to equip the next generation. If you have younger people serving in your ministry, ask them to run the Instagram. Ask them to create it, run it, and own that. That's going to, one, get them bought into the mission of the church. It's going to give them an element to own, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Right, and they've already got 9 anyway, so what's one
10?
more? Yeah, what's one more handle?
Exactly.
No, I think that's great, and I think this at the end of the day, I was talking with a bishop of a large denomination just a few weeks ago, and he's been in ministry now for decades, multiple decades. And he was talking about, even back in the day, that they were leveraging yellow pages, to reach people, and even the strategy around, what that looked like. If your business or your organization started with an A, people were more apt to find you because you were the first few pages that people scrolled through. And then how do you organize, your half page, and should it be black and white or should it be a color ad? All these different things how much information is too much, and all these things. Those questions have never gone away, but just the methods have. And one of the things that I so loved about this true shepherd, he was a bishop of a phenomenal district here in the United States, and he said, I may not feel fully comfortable with all of these digital methods because they move so fast, but I understand this is where society and culture is today, and because I care about our churches being effective, I'm willing to make these changes and willing to release some of these changes to see people connected into our churches. And I just thought that was a beautiful shepherd's heart. And I think, honestly, something that all of us really should be looking at when we're looking at about adopting new methods of communicating this timeless message.
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, that's the heart of it, right? This isn't just a modern day method. This is a biblical method. This is a biblical mandate. And that makes it really powerful. And really, when we think about it like that this is a biblical mandate to steward and shepherd for our flocks, I think that can help us shift our gears to maybe not make it feel so intimidating. Yeah,
that's wonderful. And I think for all of us that are listening, again, there are a number of tools, and one of the things that I love that you said was just pick one. So maybe it is social media, and just one aspect of social media. Maybe it is a mobile app for your church. Maybe it's just refining your website. There are so many digital spaces that are out there that people are looking for, or that the Holy Spirit can direct people to. And if we can get good at least making at least one of those effective and start there, just start somewhere, I think we have a really neat opportunity to reach people in the way that they're looking to be reached as well.
Yeah.
And thank you, Kristin, so much. Incredibly insightful. And thank you for sharing not just your expertise, but your passion and your heart as well. And maybe for our audience today, you're thinking, how can I be most effective in my context? We always want these conversations to actually lead to something productive. And so here's a few questions to consider as you're thinking about what comes next. That first question would be, what is that next step for you in your context? Is there a specific tool that you can drill down and use? And instead of trying to be proficient in everything, what's one thing that you can do to get started today to reach people? We would also say, are there any other new ideas or new strategies that you could try that you could also make room for in your current strategies that you're doing to help you become more effective in reaching your community? And then finally, along the same lines of strategies, what specific tools can you start to adopt in your strategy or in your learning, or who can you bring in that is adept with some of those new tools to start implementing right away to accelerate that mission that God has called you to? At the end of the day, we want to see people connected into faith and into families of faith. And we believe the Holy Spirit will use these tools that are available to us to do it. What does that look like for you, and how do you get started? Even as we close this time together as well, I just want to remind you, we've got a phenomenal team here at Subsplash, and our mission is to see the local church thrive and accelerate. And so one of the things that we would love to do is have a conversation with you. If you have questions about what's next and how to get started, and some of these things may feel overwhelming, that's okay. There's no shame in that. There's a lot of things out there and a lot of experts in areas. This is an area that we are experts in, and we'd love to have that conversation with you and help you figure out what that next step looks like for you, your ministry, your church community, and the context that God has called you to. And so thank you again so much for joining us today. We'd love for you to subscribe. We'd love for you to rate this. Hopefully it's a good rating. Hopefully this was beneficial for you today. And we'd love for you to join us next time on Equip and Engage.
Thanks for tuning in to Equip and Engage, where we're sharing insights learned from thousands of conversations with leaders and pastors around the world. To follow along with these conversations, subscribe today or visit our website.